Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It seems McLaren are not yet ready to admit that at least one of their two World Championship ambitions for this season is absolutely out of the window after the Brazilian Grand Prix, with Andrea Stella saying that McLaren are still not convinced the result of the US Grand Prix a few weeks ago should actually be standing. They submitted a right of review over big drama following that Grand Prix. That was rejected during the Mexico Grand Prix weekends. McLaren though would still like that looked at to try and keep Lando Norris' hopes somehow alive. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today, starting with the following. Valtteri Bottas has been on smoke. This guy just raced. Unfortunately, he's not going to be competing in Formula 1 it seems next year. Certainly not as a starting driver. As a reserve at Mercedes, that seems kind of likely, but just wanted to give a testament here to the level of athlete that Bottas is and others in his position, because he decided that during this break, basically, between the triple header that we just had and then another triple header coming soon, that he was just going to do an Ironman. So, yeah, he swam, he cycled, and then he ran a marathon to close out an Ironman in about 11 hours. So, you know, it just goes to show the fact that, like, these guys are serious athletes, and I don't really know too much about like whether the cycling pace, like I'm sure all the pace numbers here are pretty impressive. I'm sure you guys know better than I do. From the swimming perspective, this is pretty impressive. I do know a fair bit about that. And pretty, you know, for someone who's not a swimmer, in Bottas, good stroke rate. His heart rate as well is very impressive. I think that's one thing that does come to mind is, like, you know, to be able to swim for basically 4,000 meters, 4 kilometers, and maintain a heart rate reasonably in the, you know, 120-ish is very impressive going, with decent pace as well. And then he runs a marathon in 4 hours 23 minutes, which is absolutely mega. So, yeah, just super impressed with this guy, and understandably so. This is also funny going around today as well. So, the 23-hour race for mental health is coming soon, and Team Redline, of course, Max's team, Red Bull sponsors, stuff like this, they have a livery on their car which has been designed in the game, and this livery, well, there are a fair few Easter eggs for you guys to find. I guess the main one, well, there's two that I really like. The first one is this image that I shared for you guys at the start of the video, which was, you know, this will go down as a pretty historic moment, I would say, of this Formula 1 season. This is Max taking the lead against Esteban Ocon on the restart, and this is Lando Norris messing up the start and going off. Of course, wasn't long after this that Lando said, oh, well, you know, Max got lucky, right? It wasn't about talent, and, you know, that didn't necessarily sit too well with the fans. So that's on the livery, and my favourite part of the livery is the one at the bottom here. You guys can just about see it on the bottom of your screen, which is Woody, right? So we know that George Russell looks a bit like Woody from Toy Story, and they have George Russell next to Woody on the back of the car. So pretty funny stuff. There are some good other moments as well, actually, such as this one, Max Verstappen plus 10 seconds for what we've seen before. So yeah, good stuff on this, and looking forward to seeing more. Quick update as well. You guys know that the 2026 regulations have been quite controversial for Formula 1. The engine regulations certainly have been, but they're not going to change, so who cares in some level, right? It's like the teams have tried. I think Red Bull tried to lobby for a change to the engine regs. That was never going to happen. The aero regs, however, very controversial. Adjustable aero on the front and the rear wings. There was lots of potential issues with that. There were also rumours that the car was going to be so much slower than the current versions that it would just be embarrassing. So it seems that they have made quite substantial changes to the regs. There was a rumour, I think now a week and a bit ago, that the new regulations are going to be substantially faster than what was initially proposed, with more downforce therefore being generated. And also the team seem to imply that there's more freedom associated with these new regs. So it seems like whatever they've changed, we're not so sure on what they have changed yet, but it seems like they've made some adjustments the teams are pretty happy with to allow teams to explore more potential avenues and concepts that might otherwise be available, and the cars are going to be faster. So probably a positive on that front, but time will tell. But let's talk about the Red Bull situation, because they still have to choose their driver lineup for next year. Max, no-brainer, obviously. His teammate, that is the question. This is kind of remarkable as well. In the last 20 years, only 2 times has a driver achieved 8 or more poles in a season and his teammate got 0. Now, of course, with more races in a season, I guess this becomes more plausible, maybe, if you have a big performance delta over your teammate. But still, Verstappen, 10 poles in 2021, Perez had 0. Verstappen this year has 8 poles, Perez has 0. So it goes both ways. bit of an indictment on Perez. Obviously goes to show Max has been doing a great job. But the other interesting one here is actually this year, if you look at the McLaren pairing, Piastri has 0 poles, Norris has 7. So actually, if Norris gets a pole in one of the last 3 rounds, and you wouldn't necessarily bet against that at, either Qatar, Las Vegas, or Abu Dhabi. Of course, Las Vegas was an absolute horror show for the McLarens last year, but maybe that'll be a different story this time around, even though their top speed hasn't exactly been great in the last few rounds, and that's pretty key around a circuit such as Las Vegas. But it's interesting that despite that Norris and Piastri are so close, reasonably speaking, in the championship, and at least where they are in terms of their team, by pole positions, that Norris-Piastri partnership is pretty close to joining this list, which, wouldn't look so good on Piastri, although he's better than Perez, obviously, and that's why these numbers can be slightly misleading, although it still does paint a picture of what's happened at McLaren this season. But Red Bull do have to find a replacement, right? Well, you would think so. They may not, and that may be decided, but the big rumour, I would say, recently is that, yes, we've said for the last couple of years, Perez has got to go now, surely, and he never does, but there's rumours that Carlos Slim and the guys over at Telmex, they're not going to maintain their support of Red Bull too much longer, and, therefore there might not be so much incentive. And there's just been so much talk behind the scenes over the last few days that Red Bull are seriously working on another strategy here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see what that might potentially be. Unfortunately for Yuki, it's just not going to happen. I'm tired of talking about Red Bull overlooking him, so I'm not going to do it again. I'm just going to mention that they are. Then I'm going to mention quickly Valtteri Bottas, because, it's not implausible that Bottas could be an ideal second driver to Verstappen. We talked about it the other day, and now it's been talked about more so in the media. Again, I don't think it's something that Red Bull are going to be going for. What they look to be going for is Franco Colapinto. Now, what's very interesting about this latest article today is that not only is he apparently their priority target, as in their number one target, they're trying to sign Franco Colapinto, but also the article suggests here that actually him going straight into the main team is a not implausible possibility, as is described here over in these sentences. However, Colapinto's sensational performances have catapulted him to the top of the shortlist. It is understood that Christian Horner's team are in advanced talks with Williams over Franco Colapinto. There are even suggestions that, rather than putting VCARB or the Argentine into a VCARB seat, Red Bull are actually considering making him Verstappen's teammate, which would be a mega decision if they were to make it. Is that a good idea? I think is another question entirely. Colapinto is quite interesting. When he first came into the sport, the pressure was on, obviously, it's always on, but really the pressure was just don't crash the car. Please don't crash the car, please. Sargent's been doing so much of that, we can't afford it. It turned out that not only did Colapinto not crash, but it was actually pretty damn good. And he's got lots of praise from his engineers in terms of the feedback that he's able to give. And his first 3-4 races were very impressive. Baku, Singapore, obviously Monza as well. There were some great races in there that Colapinto delivered. But the last couple of rounds, Mexico, and then certainly in Brazil, which was a disaster for many drivers, to be fair, not least Sergio Perez. It's look, would I rather have Colapinto's driver profile at Red Bull or Perez's? I would take the rookie, right? But is that so clear cut? Because, Colapinto also had a difficult weekend. Obviously had the crash that caused the red flag, other moments earlier in the weekend as well. The car's got some serious damage on it, and look, just when the pressure was ramping maybe on Colapinto, this is when you really see, don't you? Because when he first came in, he knew he wasn't getting a drive for next year on paper. It was Albon's sight, and of course there's pressure coming into F1, but on some level it's look, just don't be worse than Sargent. That was the pressure, and he delivered on that. But after the first few good races, then the pressure's on. It's damn, Colapinto, there's no drive on the seat at Williams or no drive on the grid at Williams for a seat there in the next year or so. So someone else might be interested in your services. All of a sudden, the eyes of the world are watching Colapinto. Very, heavy scrutiny on him. Is he better than Albon? Is Albon washed up? Is Albon bad suddenly? Is Colapinto, the best thing since sliced bread? Obviously, massive Argentine presence. And over the last couple of race weekends, it's not been so good. So maybe there's something in that. I'm not saying that Colapinto's bad or not good, or I definitely think he's a promising driver and I want to see more from him from now to the end of the season. But I think it's plausible that after his first 4 or so 5 good races, there was serious pressure on him then to, deliver, because he knew that the likes of Red Bull are starting to watch, and having started to watch him, his performances haven't been quite as good. Now, does that matter in the grand scheme of things? Because you're expecting a rookie in a Williams to have his moments, especially in a difficult situation like the, Brazilian Grand Prix that we had this weekend, which, basically every driver was suffering with. So the idea of getting him into the Red Bull family, as it were, I think is still a no-brainer. Even if Colapinto can't keep up his early good form from now to the end of the season, I still think he's worth giving a go to. Alpine apparently are interested too. They might just say to Jack Doohan, unlucky mate, like it wasn't to be, although apparently it was on paper. We're going to get Colapinto instead. Not so sure about that idea, but I do think that Colapinto going to Red Bull makes sense, but probably if it's the B team, really. I don't know if putting him alongside Max is a good idea. Now, I will say Colapinto's personality, I think that he could handle it, to be honest. But I also think that Liam Lawson could potentially handle it. And maybe Yuki could as well, to some degree. Lawson and Colapinto are different characters, I would say. And, Lawson does have maybe a slightly more of an edge to him, as it were. And maybe, but, does he have Colapinto's pace? I mean, possibly. I don't think there's enough evidence to say either way. But that's the question it seems that Red Bull are currently weighing up. Getting rid of Perez is borderline a no-brainer at this point, especially if they're not getting the money coming through the door from Telmex that they were expecting to. So then it's really between Lawson and Colapinto. The theory went that they were going to give Lawson the drive and put Colapinto in the B team, but now there's talk that, well, if Lawson doesn't do as good of a job, maybe we keep him at RB and we actually put Colapinto straight in the Red Bull, which would be wild if it happens, but it would be exciting for sure. I mean, any driver change is exciting, certainly a team like Red Bull alongside Max, to see how, and whether another driver is going to get chewed up and spat out, basically. And I think that Lawson and Colapinto are drivers that, I don't think they have the pace, personally, who has the pace to challenge Max? But you know what I'm saying, right? I don't know if they're going to be able to quite be in that league, but do they have the temperaments to handle it? That is another question. And I think that's something that will be getting analysed, right? Red Bull think about this type of stuff. How would Colapinto handle being in the Red Bull seat alongside Max? Would that be better than how Lawson would handle it? Because if it is, then that's worth considering, even though he's not even yet anywhere close to being a Red Bull driver. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments. Let's get into some of the on-track action though, because I just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that it seems like ever since Hamilton has confirmed that he's joining Ferrari, basically Ferrari have gained Hamilton and Mercedes in exchange have gained the Ferrari strategy team, because I don't know what's going on over there lately, and this is why when there's talk about, Mercedes are sabotaging Hamilton or whatever, I think the more likely explanation, in the same way that I said with the FIA, if they look incompetent, or if they look biased, it's more likely they're just incompetent than they're actually biased. Maybe there's bias in play, I don't know. But I think it's more likely that there is incompetence at play rather than malice. And I feel like the same at Mercedes. It's like, and it's not like the things that have happened to Hamilton don't happen to Russell either, because Russell was on the radio during the Grand Prix saying what many of us watching at home were thinking. I think we should stay out. It's going to go red. Now, I will say, first of all, it's kind of a ridiculous scenario where the teams are incentivized to stay out on a completely wet track with intermediate tyres that are not the correct tyre, but they're incentivized to do that because if they box for the correct tyre, which would be the wet tyre, as certain teams did, someone is going to bin it. It might get red flagged anyway because the rain is going to be too heavy, and then you get a free change under the pit stop anyway. So this is the problem with the way that it currently is, because the teams are literally incentivized to keep their drivers out there in a very dangerous condition and just wait for someone to crash. Then when it gets red flagged, then you pit and get the free pit stop, right? So, and Mercedes knew this. Well, Russell certainly knew this, because on the radio he was saying, look, it's probably going to go red this right now. It's looking awful out here. I think we've got to stay out. And they said, understood, George. So, box, we're going to come in. And, well, eventually he was like, no, let's not do that. It's going to go red. We shouldn't do it. And then they said, box. And George was like, well, they know more than me. And then, of course, the red flag comes out and George's race gets ruined. So it's just one of these things, isn't it? Now, look, Mercedes from a safety POV to protect George, did the right thing. But from a strategy POV, this was a disaster class. And it's not an unknown thing for Mercedes to have a bit of a nightmare with their strategy lately. But McLaren is talking about the championships. We know that Andrea Stella says that actually Lando winning it was not even the priority. And it's tough to read this on some level because Stella had spent some time working with Alonso in his day. He spent some time working with Michael Schumacher, did he not, in his day? And this is the mentality that we have over there at McLaren, apparently. I don't know. Now, look, sure, the Constructors was always more plausible, more likely than Lando's championship, but, and maybe it makes sense that one was prioritised over the other. As we know, they probably prioritised the Drivers' Championship too late in the season, but of course they did eventually prioritise it, even though maybe Stella doesn't want to admit that. But clearly they did ask Oscar, of course, to pull over a couple of times. The key point, though, really being on this moment back in Austin, because it seems like even though McLaren right now may only care for the Constructors' Championship, the points lost here to Max are still relevant to some extent, right? So if you guys remember this instance of the US Grand Prix, Lando's trying to overtake on the outside. He actually gets a full car length ahead of Max going into the braking zone, but Max brakes deep, as he likes to do, runs Lando out of road, but because Max got to the apex first, therefore Lando was entitled to no space, and after he overtook off the track, Lando got a 5-second penalty and eventually finished behind Max in the Grand Prix. Controversial, of course, the McLaren argument was that actually Lando was fully ahead going into the apex, and therefore this was not a overtaking attempt that Max defended, but actually this was Max overtaking, or at least attempting to overtake Lando by sending it down the inside and going off the track in the process, which, if Max had kept the position, McLaren would have said, hey, that's a forcing off the track and getting an advantage offence, basically. And but in this occasion, he stayed behind, and therefore McLaren were arguing, well, actually, no, this was perfectly fair what Lando did because he was already ahead, and the overtake was complete going into the corner. The FIA never said whether they agreed with that assessment or not, because all they said was, well, you brought no new evidence to the table, so we're just going to dismiss it outright. So, whether McLaren are right or wrong, I think what they're arguing is questionable, although I think most people would agree that the way the regulations are written that allows Max to do this type of stuff probably needs to change, and it will, we believe, in due course. But Stella's still talking about it, right? Like, McLaren are still talking about this, and they say they're following. We still believe that final classification is not correct. They don't think that Lando should have got the 5-second penalty that he did. They think he should have finished ahead of Max in the end, which, was a pretty big deal for the end of the race, because Lando getting that move onto Max done, finishing third, right, as he would have done there, would have been, a 3-point swing in the championship. Obviously, Max therefore gained 3 points in that as well, so it was a 6-point swing. And in the Drivers, the way that it currently looks, maybe it's not too much of a big deal. But in the Constructors, those 3 points could well prove to be critical, right? I think that's the point that, Stella is trying to get over. But clearly, McLaren are not ready to yet admit that, in some way this season they've just been outperformed at times by a single man, and to be fair, by a car that was absolutely dominant at the start of the season. But, when Max has no longer had the fastest car, he has been consistently scoring excellent points, even without wins. Whereas when Max had the fastest car, he was winning with ease. Lando has made his life much more challenging since that scenario has somewhat reversed. But very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. This is the way things currently look in the championship this season compared to what they were like this time last year. But hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.